right. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rabbi Daniel Wiener. I'm one of the rabbis here at Temple to Hirsch Sinai, and it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you here for this very special program. We are delighted to bring two luminaries from the Hartman Institute to our community. Many of us have studied with Hartman either in person or virtually, and so we know the incredible value and significance of their programming for our community and for most communities, all communities. One quick thing before I turn it over to those who will be introducing our guests for the evening. If you get a chance outside, we're trying to leverage some of the feeling and some of the accomplishments, some of the fellowship and accord that we generate here this evening beyond just this discrete moment. There is an opportunity to sign a covenant, a brit, an eid, for affirming really not only the connections between the Jewish and Muslim communities, but particularly with everything going on in the broader community, the broader country, vis-a-vis the perniciousness and the insidious turn that our presidential election has already taken. The opportunity to affirm our desire to transcend that kind of fear and stereotyping and recrimination is critical, and to do so publicly. And so please, on your way out, if you find that you are able to sign our covenant, please do so. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Bobby.
Rabbi Wiener, thank you for hosting us. Thank you all for coming. My name is Bob Sulkin, and Elaine and I have been members of the Hartman board for 10, 11 years now. It has been an amazing experience for us. Hartman is a pluralistic research center located in Jerusalem and in New York. But it is not just creating amazing content with world-renowned scholars. What it does is deliver content on some of the most critical issues facing the Jewish people, whether it's through the Engage program, which many of you have been through, or the Be'eri program, which is a program in Israel in which high school students in Israel, many of them are in secular schools, they get no Jewish education. Hartman stepped in, and now we're in 125 high schools in Israel, teaching 90,000 students. First Orthodox, and I think only, Orthodox girls' high school in Jerusalem. It's audacious in what it does. But tonight, maybe the most audacious program that Hartman's ever engaged in. And it started really with a reach out by the Imam Abdullah Antepli. And what he did was very courageous in a time when the relations between Muslims and Jews are at their all-time low. He reached out to Hartman to see if there can be a bridge. And it's not an interfaith study, it really is an effort of communication. I'm not going to go into the Muslim Leadership Initiative. I'll let Abdullah and Yehuda talk about that. But I do get the pleasure of introducing them, and it's always a problem because I feel so belittled when I go through their resumes. But I'll do it, okay? Abdullah. Abdullah Antepli was born in Turkey. He's an imam. He worked in humanitarian relief programs in Southeast Asia, became the first Muslim chaplain at Wesleyan University, eventually wound up at Duke University as chaplain at Duke University, teaches Islamic studies there.
Any Blue Devils?
Other than,
No?
he's a senior fellow of Islamic Jewish relations at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Thank you for being here. Yehuda Kurtzer is the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. He has an MA from Brown University in Religious Studies, PhD in Jewish Studies from Harvard. He's an author, taught at Brandeis. He is a true visionary, and he did this all before you were 40, I think. So I am going to turn the microphone over to these two gentlemen, and both of them are just all-around good guys, too. So thank you.
Can you hear me? Muslims 1, Jews 0. No. Is it turned on?
How about now?
Baruch Hashem.
Great. So first of all, a few thank yous. First of all, to Rabbi Wiener for hosting us here tonight and the whole team here at Temple de Hirsch. And thank you to our friends Bobby and Elaine Sulkin, and to Dan and Stacy Levitan, and to many of our friends here in Seattle who have welcomed us here, made tonight's program possible, spread the word, and brought so many friends. You know, sometimes you set out to do something important and valuable in the world just because you think it's important and valuable, even if you don't exactly know where it's going to lead and where it's going to take you, and even if you don't know quite yet how urgent it's going to become. When we started doing this work at the Shalom Hartman Institute with Imam Antepli, I think 3 years ago, in the creation of the Muslim Leadership Initiative, I don't think it was any of our radar screens that Islam would become a subject of referendum in the American political elections. We knew, based on our conversations with Muslim leaders, that the position of Muslims in America was precarious in ways that were disproportionate to the realities of who Muslim Americans actually are. That since 9/11, Muslims in America have been called upon to be representatives of Islam as it plays out everywhere else in the world. We also knew that because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, perhaps more than any other thing, perhaps more than any other matter, Jews and Muslims in America, even though they share a tremendous amount in common, and even though there are tremendous points of access and potential for rich cooperation and collaboration, were finding themselves more and more incapable of being allies and partners on all sorts of other political issues that seem to have no relevance to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We knew some of this. We knew this in part because we have done international theology conferences in Jerusalem for 30 years, and we were getting fewer and fewer Muslims who were willing to participate, and fewer, even as an institute that positioned itself and prided itself as valuing religious pluralism in the fullest sense, theologically, epistemologically, and otherwise. The invitation to bring Muslims from America to participate in this work was going increasingly unanswered. A lot of our work at the Institute goes to asking big questions that face the Jewish people, whether in the state of Israel or here in America. And one of those questions has always been, what is going to be the relationship between Jews and members of other faith communities, especially Christians and Muslims, in trying to make the case for religion to be a source of at least as much inspiration, ethics, and problem solving in the world as it is the problems that need to be solved. Right? We know that has been a piece of the Institute's mission for 30 years. But increasingly, we were finding that the exact people who we should be talking to as part of this work, i.e. Muslims, were increasingly reluctant to participate in these conversations with us for a lot of the reasons that I alluded to before. When Imam Antepli came to our theology conference, he came to the leadership of the Institute and said, you know, you guys run these Christian leadership programs where you bring Christian clergy from across America to come study at the Hartman Institute and to hear from Jews how Jews understand Judaism in their own idiom, through their own lens, unapologetically, looking at these challenges. And that discourse makes possible a Jewish-Christian dialogue that is very different than the usual banalities that usually pass for interfaith dialogue. Why don't you run a similar program for American Muslims? And we said, ha ha ha. What are the likelihood?
Literally.
What's the likelihood that a group of American Muslims are going to travel to Jerusalem, come to the Hartman Institute, and study with Jews at a Zionist pro-Israel institution? And Abdullah said, and we have learned in the last couple of years, that when Abdullah makes a commitment to something, he is relentless and fierce in his ability to deliver on these commitments. He said, if I bring the participants, will you run the program? 3 years later, we're in the middle of our third cohort of this program. 60 Muslim American leaders, mostly between the ages of 35 and 45, have traveled to Israel at least once, and the program consists of 2 trips, in addition to which they participate in multiple seminars in America with all of the cohorts together, looking at all of the hard questions that the Jewish community is asking of itself and its future unapologetically. And the goal of this program, in ways that transcend some of what usually happens in interfaith dialogue, which is, number one, representational. We represent Jews, you represent who you are. Number two, tends to focus on areas of shared commonality and parks the stuff that we can't really talk about or disagree about. And number three, oftentimes involves showcasing the good stuff of each of our own religions to try to use that as a point of entry. Unlike all of those efforts, MLI is an educational program for American Muslims to hear Jews talk and struggle out loud with some of the hardest things that we have to deal with in our own tradition, our own community, as a tool to level the playing field for an honest and meaningful conversation once we come back to the American context. And I have to say, I think that this program, and I'm going to ask you to speak about this, has the potential to be transformative for American Muslims in a lot of ways. But I think I underplayed and have underestimated the extent to which it would be personally transformative as well. As an American Jew who sees in a very different way the condition and the circumstances that American Muslims face, and sees part of my job in ways that I didn't anticipate when I signed up for this, that a Jewish conversation with Christians and Muslims that is honest and candid has to be a critical feature of the American Jewish agenda, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of the American religious context in which we belong. That's the spirit in which we run this program. And our goal tonight is to talk a little honestly about some of the areas and issues that divide Jews and Muslims in America, to talk candidly about Jewish political differences, Jewish and Muslim political differences, and to try to put on the table the question of whether it's possible for us to forge a new type of relationship with people of other faiths in a context in which that kind of relationship is so desperately needed, but to do so in a way that's unadulterated, unapologetic, and deeply sincere without having to avoid the sources of tension. My role tonight after this introduction is to essentially be the interviewer and moderator for Abdullah. And so Abdullah, why don't you start off by sharing a little bit of your personal journey and what motivated you to open up this door and to begin what ultimately would become a literal and metaphorical pilgrimage, not just to Jerusalem, but to the Jewish community in a way that would try to have ripple effects and transformative effects for your own community.
Thank you. Good evening, and assalamu alaikum. It is really absolutely a pleasure and honor to be here in this house of God, in this beautiful Seattle. I've never been here before. I would like to add my own thanks to our gracious host, especially my good friend Dan Lavitan, who played a very central role in putting this together. We have already had 3-4 meetings, and I'm going to be having several more tomorrow and after tomorrow. I'm really grateful. And I'm hoping in no way my Turkish accent will not give you any difficulty in understanding what I'm about to say. I grew up in southeastern part of Turkey in a small town, not religious, but extremely secular, but at the same time anti-Semitic family. The secular education that I have received has made me believe, in short, in a number of years. Not only I grew up receiving biased, negative views about Judaism as religion and Jews as people, but I think that would be an understatement. For a number of years, what I have been exposed about my sources of information about Judaism as religion and Jews as people has convinced me to believe that something is irredeemably evil and destructive about Judaism as religion and Jews as people. At the age of 12, the first book that I have read about Jews and Judaism, guess which one? Children's version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And the second book was Henry Ford's International Jew. I'm not going to tell the third book, which is regretfully now one of the bestsellers, Mein Kampf, in Turkey. Again, it wasn't necessarily anti-Semitism imposed in the form of religiosity. My parents were very secular. Turkey, as you might know, it's one of the most secular countries. In 1980s, one of the very first images that I have seen on TV about Israel, Judaism, Zionism, was IDF soldiers breaking the bones of Palestinian people. But God is God of mercy and compassion, and didn't allow me to live with that kind of level of hate in myself. Through incredible rich and providential journeys, I was able to get that poison out of my system. I was able to, first of all, become religious and learn about Islam. The more religious I became, the more I studied Quran, the more I studied Prophet Muhammad and his life. He married 2 Jewish women. He had Jewish in-laws. He'd sit with them, dine with them, had peace with them, covenant with them. And the more I studied Jewish-Muslim relations and history in the last 1400 years, that study and meeting with God-fearing, God-loving Jews, mentors like Dr. Yehuda Kurtzer and others, it made me take the nearest exit, and since then I've been driving the opposite direction as fast as I can. Because I'm relentless, because I believe, I don't want to reinsert the existing stereotypes. I am one of many victims of this hate and propaganda. There are many, many other Muslims, because of the toxic energy of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this political conflict in the Middle East. Muslim anti-Semitism has existed even before. But in this form and shape, most of the Muslim anti-Semitism, which is regretfully on the rise in certain Muslim communities, even including the United States, in its current form and shape, it is a post-1948 reality. And I believe, as I have healed and recovered from my own self-destructive poison, and I have absolutely self-interest but nothing else, because hate, as Islam and Judaism teaches us, first destroys the one who holds that hate, before even damages, before even give harms to anybody else. So it's a personal recovery journey for me and for my community. When people hear me talk about Jewish-Muslim relations, they always say, you sound like a Theodor Herzl. Because something bad will happen. Something horrible. I don't want to sound alarmist. I'm not here to crisis narrative. But at the same time, if you don't get dismayed, if you are not shocked, if you are not really discouraged, if not depressed about the Jewish-Muslim relations, that means you are not paying enough attention. That means, and if you think this is really horrible and getting worse, and if you think a similar reconciliation which took place between Jews and Christians in the 20th century is now a moral, ethical responsibility for Jews and Muslims of the 21st century, a similar reconciliation needs to take place. We need to put ourselves into an incredibly hard work, because we need to be clearing out and reconciling decades-long hate, prejudice, and stereotype in our both respective communities.
So what are the specific ways in which you think that, in the American context, the anti-Semitism that's born out of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is damaging the situation of American Muslims? And take the reverse side of it as well. To what extent does any sort of Jewish role in the rise of Islamophobia, is that, can you unpack a little bit what these forces are doing to you as an American Muslim?
People rather naively ask whether Jews and Muslims are enemies. Are we at odds with one another? Should we be enemies? I think, as you beautifully said and invited us, we can only do the work that needs to be done with the absolute spirit of honesty. Not only in theory and abstract, if you look the way we treat one another, if you look the way we perceive one another, if you look what kind of images, colors, shapes, names, and emotional reactions appear when we think of each other as Jews and Muslims, we are, in our treatment, effectively in our behaviors and in our treatment of one another, we are treating each other like enemies. The little bit about Muslim anti-Semitism. Muslim anti-Semitism existed even, as I said before, 1948. But it was never, unlike Christian anti-Semitism. Unlike Christian anti-Semitism, it wasn't stemming from the core teachings of Islam. It was always episodic. It was always peripheral. It was always depending on the kind of ruler situation. I'm not saying all Christianity is anti-Semitic, but Christian anti-Semitism stems from one of the core stories of Christianity, Jesus on the cross. It wasn't in that sense. But after 1948, the creation of the State of Israel, and this, which is a good news, now that I learn about many of my Jewish brothers and sisters, it is a homecoming to a lot of my Jewish brothers and sisters. But the way it took place and perceived by many, many Muslims, it is it has created a new form of anti-Semitism. For me, Jews and Muslims, as an imam, as a clergy, more often than I would really prefer and like, I facilitate many, many weddings, but also I facilitate many, many divorces. And one of the most painful to see, a couple who has been together for 20, 30 years, they are going through a very bitter divorce. And all they can remember about the last 20 years and 30 years is the bad stuff and the horrible stuff. Both of them are going back and rewriting their history. Both of them are going back and rewriting their theology, rewriting their entire relationship. And for the most part, since then, that increasing enmity, that political conflict, which captured the religious imagination of Muslims and Jews globally all around the world, we are going back and rewriting our history. We are pulling those elements of theology, parts of Quran and parts of Hadith tradition, and building a whole new theology of hate that never existed before. So the kind of, especially in the United States, coming back to your question, so far, if you look at what we are doing as Jews and Muslims, we are importing conflict. We are importing hopelessness and despair from Middle East to here, let alone reversing that negative energy and exporting hope and inspiration to Middle East. Forget about it. But it is further dividing us. It is further, we are seeing each other through the lenses of security, threat, and when we think of each other, forget about the crazies or the violent people. Our very presence is often treated as a source of threat.
One of the repeated demands that's oftentimes made of American Muslims who are positioned as moderates or who are willing to kind of speak in the public sphere is that they're oftentimes asked to condemn terrorism around the world. And one of the things that I've learned from a number of the MLIers who have participated in this program is how fundamentally alienating that request is, because it assumes that the default stance of someone who shares a religious identity with people who are doing bad things in the name of that religion is to identify with the things that they're doing. And therefore, I assume the worst of somebody until that they're willing to stand up and condemn terrorism. Can you talk a little bit about the position that you find yourself in as an American Muslim who's talking to the Jewish community, is traveling to Israel, what that expectation or demand feels like to you, and what you would like to see instead as the posture of people who have a serious grievance against the way sometimes people act in the name of Islam all over the world. What would you like them to be asking instead?
You know, we cannot run away and shy away from this responsibility. But you are asking a pastoral question. Whenever I hear one more person asking, where are the moderate Muslims? Why are they not condemning the violence, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, all these evil organizations doing evil things in the name of Islam? Part of me wants to just pull my hair and scream. I mean, one of the latest episodes, there's a beautiful synagogue in my area. And that's the 9th visit. In the last 12 months, I'm going to that particular synagogue to give a talk. This is the 9th time I'm visiting that synagogue, which makes my attendance chart much better than 90% of its shul members. Like if the salvation is based on your attendance to synagogue, I'm saved. But the same congregation, the same community that I have developed scriptural study where we study Quran and Torah together. Again, the same community member coming and asking, where are the moderate Muslims? This is my 9th visit. Like, why can't you take yes as an answer? And this is what it happens. This is an incredibly frustrating challenge in many ways, but this is not a responsibility I shy away from. I mean, I never decline any invitation. I look for every single opportunity to try to make sense of this craziness. But communication goes both ways. It's not fun to be Muslim in a post-9/11 America. It's not fun to be, I don't want to be playing the victim card, but the Trumps of the world, Ben Carsons of the world, Franklin Grahams of the world. I mean, for those of you who are children of Holocaust survivors, who went through this collective dehumanization, character assassination in different parts of your history, you would at least empathize. It's an incredibly frustrating business. To be an American Muslim where your reality is very impressive, 6 to 7 million Muslims living in the United States. If you look at our reality, it's very, very impressive. Average income, average education, average level of philanthropy, average level of integration to American society. If you look, American Muslim community as a minority faith tradition in the United States, our reality is very, very impressive. About two-thirds of us came after 1960s and 70s. And in 3 decades, American dream, as we followed, has been a very successful story. But if you look at our perception, it is miles away from the reality. Average American, if you are following the opinion polls, when Americans are asked so many different questions, basically asking, is Islam a kosher religion? And are American Muslims are equal American citizens? About 48% of Americans, they basically say no to this question. So half of your fellow Americans, they don't feel comfortable about you. Otherwise, very liberal, very inclusive, very much believe in civil liberties and religious liberties. But when it comes to Islam and Muslims, that's what hate does. That's what stereotype does. That you lower your standards, your ideals, your commitment to religious pluralism. And I believe everybody should be practicing their religion as they feel it. But would you feel comfortable having a mosque in your neighborhood? That number goes down. It's a very difficult and increasingly becoming more challenging reality to be an American Muslim. And this is what primarily motivated me to do MLI. To see if there is any way we can reach out to our fellow Americans, at least those who are willing to hear our story, those who are willing to pay attention to our reality, those who are willing to close that gap between our reality and perception. Thank you.
Here's a kind of an impossible issue that I'm thinking about in the context of this work, and I don't know what I think about it yet. So you'll help me think about this and help us think about it together. One of the reasons why you started coming to the Institute and why you started bringing people to the Institute was to deal with a kind of prevailing problem that oftentimes is articulated, and I've heard it articulated in places where I've traveled throughout the Arab world and speaking to many Muslims of, I don't have a problem talking to Jews, but my issue is with Zionism. And you recognized, I think, rightly, that for many Jews, that articulation or that characterization is an understanding of Judaism that's actually at odds with many Jews' own self-understanding. Right? It's so that if the majority of American Jews see Zionism as core to their Jewish identity, to say to somebody, I only want to talk to one piece of your identity and not the other, means I actually don't really want to talk to you. So part of the program was to come and understand the state of Israel as a feature of what it means to be Jewish so we could actually talk about it. At the same time, one of the things that you said earlier is that we, American Muslims and American Jews, are actually being torn apart by that conflict that's over there. And we're exporting all of those tensions back into our community. So I guess I'm trying to wonder, which way are we headed? Are we trying to understand the relationship that American Jews have to Israel and the empathy that American Muslims almost instinctively are going to have for Palestinian Muslims, because they're part of the Ummah? Is the goal to reinforce, in what ways do we reinforce those divisions by bringing the conflict front and center, and in what ways are we exacerbating our tensions here by doing that?
That's an excellent and profound question, and I hope it's clear. If it needs any clarification, please let us know. But your point is very well taken. Some of the MLI participants who went through this program, they came back and said, Abdullah, I hate you. I hate you because I was so comfortable saying, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm not anti-Semitic, but I'm anti-Zionist. That was such a comfortable spot. That was such a comfortable place to be that I didn't have to recognize my own prejudice and bias. Now that I heard and I learned what these terms mean, now I'm able to understand the role of Zionism as an ideology and Israel as a secular nation state, what kind of a role it plays in the identity of Jews wherever they are. That delusion, that comfortable space has disappeared for them. It's very uncomfortable. What I'm trying to do is, can Jews and Muslims talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict not only as Jews and Muslims, but as Americans? Because primarily I am doing MLI not only as a Muslim, but as an American. because I believe in this part of America is providing us incredible opportunities to have the kind of relationships and conversations that are possible between American Jews and American Muslims that are not possible anywhere else. It's definitely not possible in Europe. It's not possible. Jews of France and Muslims of France, they are not singing Kumbaya and Hinamatovu Manayim. And it's definitely not possible in the Middle East. It's not possible anywhere. I think American Jews and American Muslims primarily doing a huge disservice to themselves and to this beautiful country by allowing this international conflict without again inviting anybody to divorce your loyalties, your emotional commitment, which is not possible. But is there any way we can talk through this conflict, but as Americans still in relationship, in conversation with one another, and can bring our relationship to a level of strength and sophistication where we can actually reverse this negative energy flow?
You know, in one of the sessions that I was teaching a couple of years ago, you asked a question that, you know, sometimes somebody asks a question and you never forget it because it forces you to rethink how you understand an issue. We were talking about Zionism. And I was talking about religious Zionism as one of the discourses of Zionism. And you interrupted me about 10 minutes in and said, religious Zionism, fine, I get that. But what is secular Zionism if it involves you're making a claim to a land based on a text you don't believe in?
Because
and it was one of the most. One second. So it was one of the most trenchant critiques of secular Zionism I've ever heard. And I then had to go back and kind of do my homework. I guess what I would love for you to offer is something of, I want to say, what are the things that, I know that there are a lot of things that you came and came to appreciate about the Jewish people, about the state of Israel through this experience. But there are critiques that you have of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And you have a serious critique of American Jews in their relationship to American Muslims and to the state of Israel. So what are a couple of those things that you can put on the table today?
Sure, but before I answer, because until I really went to Hartman and received this kind of education, the secular Zionism, especially people who never get involved with the world of Judaism, as a Muslim, it's very difficult to understand the peoplehood. It's very difficult to understand that peoplehood is a sanctified religious value. It was very difficult to understand how you can be atheist and Jewish at the same time. Because it's the secular Zionism.
I don't know the alternative.
Secular Zionism feels, it comes across to many Muslims, I don't believe in God, but He gave me this land. Like it just doesn't. But over this education, I was able to understand and grow how these terms, especially the peoplehood, being part of a peoplehood, is the religious sanctified value. How that in itself is a theology in itself. And it's unique, it's very strikingly different than our understanding of religion or being part of a religious community, etc. What I also loved and learned is being a Jewish is not only Genesis Judaism. Being a Jewish is not only because you have a Jewish mother or because you have a lineage. But I am also fell in love with the Exodus Judaism. It's not that you just become a Jew, but there are certain qualities, ethical, moral values that you have to exhibit, you have to strive for, and you have to uphold, and you have to lift those ethical, moral values. And I think our partisanship, our proxy wars that we are running against one another should not make us fail to criticize our part, our party, our basketball team, when we see they fall short in their ethical, moral treatment of others. When we see they don't necessarily, what I'm also struggling, one of my main criticism of the American Jewish community, it's perfectly kosher to love Israel. It's perfectly kosher to be a proud Zionist. But as we don't love anybody and everybody unconditionally, some of that love has to be conditional. Some of that love has to be based on deserving that love, based on those ethical, moral principles. And if we make this unconditional, especially if it's a secular nation state, I believe we may potentially make a huge disservice to those incredible values, Jewish ethics and morals that I grew to like and fall in love, if we make our love to any ideology, any state, unconditional.
You know, two of the traps that oftentimes happen in these interfaith encounters between Jews and Muslims are either the route to the banal, right? How do I not talk about the issues that divide us, and either talk about issues of where I can create joint political organizing by sidelining the things that divide us, or we'll talk about what you can eat and what we can eat, and maybe eat it together.
I'm sure you must have been to
yes.
many of those.
So that's
halal
one
chicken,
right.
kosher chicken.
Right. That's one route. Another route of the way sometimes Jews and Muslims play this out in public is by using exemplars of each other's tradition who are actually the worst critics from within that tradition. And both Jews and Muslims do this. Jews put on stage Muslims who are public critics of Islam, and Muslims put on stage Jews who are public critics of Judaism. What would you want to see in what should this look like differently? What would be a new agenda for a kind of public Muslim-Jewish engagement?
The problem that you have outlined really speaks to the heart of the matter. And through MLI, what I hope the mainstream American Jewish community and mainstream American Muslim community will be in conversation with one another. Muslims will stop treating Natura Carta as the ideal Muslim Jews. They are our favorite Jews. And you ask the Jewish community, many of them, they don't even know who these people are.
Right. Natura Carta are ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists who, appear in various places like this.
Yeah. I don't know how many other Muslims you have invited before to this synagogue to talk. Has there been many other events? Wonderful. But if you look, some of the Muslims who are making a fortune and a career out of visiting the Jewish communities, they are often very non-representative. They are there to validate that monstrous, scary image of Islam and Muslims in the Jewish community. The fact that I think saying Jewish-Muslim relations in many circles, it's a joke, it's an oxymoron because it doesn't exist. This is not a relationship if you keep investing in your renegades, if you keep investing in your marginal figures who are there to basically just keep the culture of suspicion and division continue and flourish. But I feel those kumbaya singing sessions are as dangerous. If we only come together as Jews and Muslims, and from the beginning we say we are not going to talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you will intentionally not, yes, you may not want to pick that topic as a starter because it's not a conversation starter. But if you don't come with the intention and determination and desire that we will come together, we will invest in our overarching American identity, and we will bring our relationship to a level of strength that we can even talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict without divorcing our loyalties, emotional attachments. And that's the hope. Without doing this, I don't know how to stop this further polarization. I don't know how to tame rising anti-Semitism in the Muslim community and how to discipline the rising Islamophobia within the Jewish communities.
I want to ask you two more questions. First, I want to ask about, and then I'll open up and have you take questions from the crowd, phrased as questions, which will mean not speeches in which you go up at the end with a question mark. The first is in most of your time, when you're not working on this project with us at the Institute, you're on a college campus. And one of the great fears in the Jewish community, which is partly true and partly a great fear, is of the vulnerability of Jewish students on campus, particularly because of the rise of the BDS movement and a sensibility that, again, in some cases is very real, in some cases may not be as real as it seems, that Jewish students are highly vulnerable. What would you like to see as the agenda for Jewish-Muslim student engagement on campus, and what could be different?
Thank you. And I think my hope and fears are both with the youth, quite honestly. The reason I knock the Shalom Hartman door and say, teach us the way you see the world. Teach us how Jews and Judaism sees the world. Teach us what Zionism is to you. Because the way we learned, the way Muslim community have obsessed themselves with Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the kind of sources of information that we are consuming, especially among the younger generations, is becoming increasingly self-destructive. It is becoming self-destructive that it's even affecting our way of life, our religion, our spirituality. And again, in all honesty, I am in this for self-preservation and self-interest. It's primarily affecting and destroying my own community. I do entrance interviews to my students. Every year we receive 40, 50, steadily increasing number of Muslim freshmen on Duke University. And when I ask them, what do you want to do in the next 4 years? What do you want to do? How do you want to define your American Muslim identity? At the end of 4 years of your Duke education, what kind of an American Muslim you would like to be? What are the things that you would like to involve? What are the things that you don't want to involve to make sure we will not be? It's so interesting, almost all the time. About 40% of the Muslim students say, all I want to do is Israeli-Palestinian conflict. All I want to do is the pro-Palestinian activism. My entire Islam, my entire spirituality, it has a lot of complications if you confine your religious formation to one particular political problem, as legitimate, as important as that problem is. But more importantly, in steadily increasing percentage, my students say, the thing I don't want to do is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict issue. I am sick and tired of it. My mosque was obsessed with it. I want to free myself from it. I want to divorce myself from it. I don't necessarily see anything good or anything constructive is happening. What I see on college campuses with millennials, national Jewish and national Muslim organizations are basically losing a big time in capturing the imagination of young Jews and young Muslims to be a constructive voices. And I see a lot of alienation, a lot of pushback. What I hope to see is the proud Zionist, pro-Israeli Jewish youth having a conversation, proud pro-Palestinian, loyal Muslims, and having a constructive conversations without necessarily using this as an element for proxy war with one another, but as Americans, not as pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian camp members.
Okay, last one, and then I'm going to open up for some comments. We talk sometimes about holy envy, what it means to be envious of another person's religious tradition, and what that can do and what that can catalyze for a spiritual sensibility in terms of what one pursues in one's own religion. So I would say, first of all, what holy envy do you have of Judaism or the American Jewish community? And the flip side of, if there was one thing you wish that the American Jewish community would stop doing, what would it be?
Arguing.
No, never.
That will make them un-Jewish.
Yeah, exactly.
It will. I have so much holy envy about Judaism as a religion, especially as a recovering anti-Semite who spent a number of years thinking that this is nothing but evil. But if I have to theologic and the religious aspect, my biggest holy envy, this beautiful Shabbat concept. You know, the world's largest and most influential religion is capitalism. It's telling us work harder, work more, buy more, consume more, try harder, try more. And there is one tradition for the last 5,000 years saying us not to do that for once a week. That's an incredibly beautiful, incredibly wise, incredibly human thing, that if there is one thing from the Jewish shop that I can get it and incorporate it into Islam and to my tradition, is that whole concept of carving out a particular space. We have it in Islam with 5 daily prayers, with Ramadan. But the way in which Judaism as a religion crystallized this concept, trying to feel the presence of God in your life in such a beautiful way, is really incredible. It pumps incredible amount of holy envy in me. But sociologically and within the American context, of course, we American Muslims have incredible envy to the national efficiency and productivity of the organizational structure that the Jewish community was able to produce in the last 40 years. It's amazing how you guys became from despised minority to a beloved minority. It wasn't pain-free, it wasn't cost-free. You paid a huge cost, and that's exactly what we are studying at Hartman with the American Jewish experience. But as now, if you rank all the religious minorities, American Muslims come at the bottom. It used to be we were competing with Mormons and atheists, but in the last 3 years, we are way below as a despised minority by our fellow Americans. Of course, on top of the list is the thank God, Baruch Hashem, Alhamdulillah. I'm glad, but there is so much that the American Muslim community can learn in taking and turning the realities in our favor.
You didn't ask in the second half.
I think by and large, American Jewish community is playing a zero-sum game with the world of Islam and Muslims. By and large, many strong and powerful voices within the Jewish community convince themselves that the very presence of Islam and Muslims is a source of threat to them. And therefore, they are acting in that fashion and way. And it's quite regretful and Muslims are returning the favor. I am hoping the Muslims will stop playing the zero-sum game with the world of Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. And I hope American Jewish community will lead the charge in stopping the zero-sum game with Islam and Muslims.
Thank you. Let me open up some questions.
Could you please?
I'm going to ask you to just just give us a question.
That's a very helpful way of putting it. You know, what Muslims or what Muhammad, Islam claimed, they never claimed to be a distinctly new religion. Islam always saw in its theological as well as in historical context as the continuation of Judaism and Christianity. Islam always saw itself as the youngest sibling of the Abrahamic family. And whenever I use that term Abrahamic family, I sort of fight with myself. Because I wonder, whenever I say Abrahamic family, these Hindus and Buddhists look at this Abrahamic family and say, boy, what a dysfunctional family. We neither act like a family, nor we don't realize by saying family we exclude the other half of the world. But the problems we are facing is those similarities that you have mentioned. Being similar, often you have less patience, less endurance, less tolerance to your own kind than the others. You are more tolerant and accommodating to outsiders than your own kind. That similarity is not always a positive thing. And I believe many of the challenges that we are facing within Judaism, Jewish and Muslim communities, stems from that incredible similarity.
I want to share one other comment in response to this, which is a little bit of a methodological comment. And it's one thing that we found at the Institute that has been really animating in our ability to talk to American Muslims, which is that when they come to the Hartman Institute, we don't talk to them about Islam. We actually made a deliberate choice that's like the phenomenon of mansplaining, right? Men explaining things about women to women. That phenomenon can play a very pernicious role in interfaith dialogue as well, where it becomes as though the responsibility of a Jewish institution is to explain the relationship of Jewish ideas to Muslim ideas for Muslims. And it's actually been very freeing. And one of the harder thing for some of our faculty has been to let go of what they know about Islam and actually just teach Judaism and to be authentic bearers of their own Jewish tradition and to let the let our Muslim dialogue partners be the representatives and ambassadors of their own tradition without having to stitch together our version of your tradition in order to make this possible. And it's an exercise in a kind of humility of listening, which oftentimes gets pushed aside when people are trying to build bridges with very good intentions. And it's something I want us to try to think about.
Let's take one male, one female question, so we'll have gender balance.
Yes, right there. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Numbers. No. So I'll say a couple of things. One is, when I was in Jerusalem a few weeks ago with the second cohort of this program, I asked a few of the participants about, somewhat naively, about racial tensions among American Muslims, between American Muslims, between African American Muslims and South Asian and so forth. And I got a long discourse on how challenging and complicated it is. And at the same time, there's no shortage of, poor and oftentimes unacknowledged racial tensions within the Jewish community where there actually is a bigger challenge to overcome. Because of the language of peoplehood, there's an implicit assumption in Jewish life that we are a kind of ethnic identity, a weird ethnic identity, and we're not really sure what to do with racial and ethnic difference, and that conversation gets sublimated. And one of the things that I've found very powerful about my conversations with Muslims is because the idea of a universal religion was one of the core ideas of Islam, like a genuinely universal vision, which for Jews is actually a little bit of a scary idea. Whereas our people has universal stuff that we want to have happen for the world, but we don't need everybody else to do what we do. But there's something actually very, very compelling and simple about a universal vision that attempts to make space for, in theoretical construction, all of those who would abide by and adhere to the vision that it has for the world. And I think that there's something stunningly leveling about people that I think it would be useful for the Jewish community to learn and understand a little bit more intimately. Yes, you're in the front.
Yes.
What has to be overcome is, and I don't know how that happens, is I see myself as a Jewish American. A Muslim Jewish American, Muslim American. So we meet, and it's hard not to have that lower layer. It's hard to get to this upper layer, this group called Americans. How does one go about it? How do you see one going about having that dialogue?
You are asking the $1 million question. And first, if we see, there are two major obstacles, and I've seen this over and over and over and over. If American Jews and American Muslims, if they can overcome two major obstacles, and if they take one extra mile and invest in themselves in basically doing two things. One, there is a great scale of ignorance. There is a great scale of not knowing each other. It's not even not knowing, unknowing, misknowing each other. Often, I feel the kind of ignorance on both sides always looks like American Jewish community is looking at the Seattle map, and the American Muslim community is looking at the New York map. thinking that they are actually looking into the same map, they are arguing and shouting one another. First, we have to develop this common respectful language between one another. I will give you an example. For many Muslims, when they criticize the state of Israel, they think they are just criticizing a secular nation state. They criticize Turkey, they criticize Egypt, they criticize any other state. But it took several years of growing and learning and understanding for me to see that secular nation state, its existence, its historical place, it's more than, for many of my Jewish brothers and sisters, it's more than a secular nation state. It is much more that it gives some sort of a safety, security, some connection, some spark and joy. Its very existence to an average American Jew living in Seattle. And most of that criticism that Muslim naively saying, I see clearly is received by American Jewish community or many American Jews as an existential threat. Similarly, there are so many different, like for many, many Muslims, when you say Zionism, the emotional reaction and connotation that we have invested into that word is pretty much like average most American Jews when you hear the word jihad. It makes a similar reaction. How can a word giving comfort, safety, and identity, pride to one community which pumps fear, anxiety, and scare culture to another community? You can never have a conversation. The same word in English, Zionism. Or when a Muslim, often they express their loyalty and sympathy to Palestinian suffering, the kind of human rights violations that the Palestinian community is going through. They feel they are expressing their humanitarian, first of all, solidarity with these people. But often, because of this communication issue, because of the kind of information that we have been feeding ourselves for so long, it is received. What appears on the Jewish screen and mirror is completely different. First, we have to, you're asking the how question. We have to go beyond what we know. We have to go beyond the kind of usual sources of information of one another. That's why I'm going to Shalom Hartman. Because the way I learned Judaism, Zionism, Israel from my own Muslim resources is not helping. It's not helping me to develop a respectful language to speak with my fellow American Jews. One is educational crisis. Without solving this problem, we are not going to go anywhere. The second one is there is absolutely no trust in many corners of the Jewish Muslims. Even if you learn how to speak to one another, there was one in the synagogue when I was pouring my life and my desire to improve Jewish-Muslim relations. Everything I said, I mean, at least 5 people came and said, how do we know you are not lying? Because your religion is telling me that you are religiously mandated to lie. The famous Muslim term, taqiyya. Many Jews, before they learn about the second name of Muhammad, they know the taqiyya. They basically sort of learn this religiously mandated lie. Without building the trust, without making the kind of gestures to pump and create, without leveling and bringing down those seen and unseen walls of mistrust one another, we're not going to be able to do it. So we have to build trust, and we have to educate each other, diversify our source of information about each other.
I want to add one other piece to this, because I think it goes to the heart of our work, but it's very hard to do. And it's hard for the American Jewish community to do this in intra-Jewish dialogue, much less in intergroup relations. And that is one of the operative principles that we brought into this program, and I'm telling you, it's really difficult, is no litmus tests. And that meant both ways. So for instance, the program has come under public criticism, and some of you have raised this to me before the program, that the Hartman Institute receives funding from some donors who make donations elsewhere to institutions that are anathema to the Muslim community. That is a litmus test. And therefore, somebody might not want to come to the Hartman Institute because I'm using second-hand relationships that are connected to the Hartman Institute to invalidate what the Hartman Institute has to say. The reverse is also true. There are folks who are coming to MLI, to the Hartman Institute, who hold political views that are considered deeply anathema in the Jewish community. Support for the BDS movement, and so forth and so on. But if our attitude is no litmus test, we have to apply it in both sides. this is crippling the internal Jewish community as well. Our ability to speak to each other has become hampered by, well, you belong to that synagogue, or more accurately, you belong to this Israel advocacy organization on the right, or that one on the left, and I won't even hear what you have to say until I figure out what your credentials are to say it. And one of the critical tools to honest engagement is, I'm going to talk to you because you're willing to talk to me. The fact that you have other attitudes and affiliations and associations and sources of funding that I find questionable, that might be something that we eventually will be able to talk about. I might be able to convince you why this is so problematic. But if I make as the point of entry the litmus tests of what you belong to otherwise, you'll never actually be able to create meaningful traction to build the community that you want to ultimately have.
Increasingly, Jews and Muslims are only talking to people that they agree. Like, what's the point then? You don't make peace. You don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with people whom you disagree. Increasingly, it's becoming more difficult to reach out to people whom you have political and otherwise disagreements. And we have to get away from this litmus test culture. I'm going to only talk to you if you sign saying you 100% agree in everything that I do. This is, I mean, when you think about it, it's not logical, but if you look at our organizational structure, our communal reflexes, that's exactly what we are doing to one another.
Yes.
What is your name? Two wonderful questions. One of the long-term aspirations and dreams of MLI is to trigger JLI. Because MLI is not an interfaith dialogue effort. We don't go there and we tell them what we believe and they tell us what they believe. It is a one-way educational outreach. Muslims reaching out to Jewish community, a respectful, credible, Zionist, Israeli institution. Teach me how you see things, how you experience things. We are hoping this will be reciprocated and there will be a JLI, Jewish Leadership Initiative. And MLI has already created enough goodwill, and I think I recruited so many people in this room. The ball is on our court. In the same framework and structure that we are doing MLI, in order to do JLI, we need a Muslim majority society or Muslim institution with 100% Muslim money, welcoming Israeli and American Jews and teaching our story. That structure doesn't exist. And it's going to take a little bit longer hard work. Initially, we thought we could do it in Turkey, in Morocco, in Jordan, in Bosnia. Now we are even thinking starting a small scale, doing it in the United States, because there's so much desire. I know when I talk about Muslim ignorance of Jews and Judaism and Zionism and Israel, that ignorance mirrored in the Jewish community, even far so. And when we were doing this MLI, somebody from Shalom Hartman in Jerusalem, one of the holiest cities in Islam, she's calling me all the way to Durham, North Carolina and saying, you told us to put the Muslim prayer times in the schedule. What are the Muslim prayer times in Jerusalem? I said, open your window. Don't you see Aqsa? Like, how can you call all the way from Jerusalem to North Carolina, the Bible Belt, to talk about Muslim prayer times? I see that's a real deal. But the ball is partially in our court as Muslims. We have to put it together. In the short run, we are running some webinars, online seminars. Some of the MLI participants, now that they feel confident, they learn enough of Judaism, Zionism, and Israel, they feel confident to teach similarly Islam and Muslim societies. They are doing webinar courses. I really encourage you to get in touch with Bobby and Elaine and others if you would like to be part of those short-term solutions. Your second question is, one of my favorite songs is, I think 95 or 97, when God says to children of Israel, sing me some new songs, Shir Chadash. Sing me some new songs. And I think if we are honest, it's about time for Jews and Muslims, at least locally, in Seattle, in North Carolina, wherever we are. The old songs that we have been singing is not helping to anybody. It's not helping, it's putting our younger generation's future into jeopardy. If there is a will, there is a halachic way. I don't think that we have brought ourselves to a level of desire and understanding that if there is enough will to force and go a little bit countercultural and say the Jewish-Muslim relations in Seattle can be better. I haven't checked the nearest mosque yet. There are so many wonderful Muslim faces I see around here. I haven't gone one extra mile. One of the biggest difficulty that we are facing is not those crazies, not those evil people doing evil things in the name of Judaism and Islam. But unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of Muslims and Jews, they are lazy moderates. And I'm really tired of these lazy moderates. They are overwhelming majority in our both respective communities, but they mask their laziness, ineffectiveness, inactiveness behind their moderateness. And they don't realize how their silence, their laziness is empowering the crazies. And how they are empowering these crazies, that they are hijacking the power and running our communities into really dangerous shores. We have to stop becoming lazy moderate and becoming radical peacemakers. We have to become radical peacemakers in our communities. Reach out. How many Muslim doors that you have knocked that people slammed the door in your face? How many efforts didn't yield any results? And don't take no as an answer. If one door is closed, there are so many other doors open. And you'll be surprised how many wonderful Muslim communities are out there in disbelief that there are no Jews to talk to. As many Jewish brothers and sisters, they just sit in disbelief that there are no Muslims to talk to.
Let me take one or two more. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the short answer is we've got a lot of work to do. The richer approach is that I think there are techniques that have yet to be really fully tried. This morning we met with a group of rabbis here in the community, and we studied together. We did a kind of joint Jewish-Muslim Beit Midrash. And the Beit Midrash that we did was that we each picked some of the lousy stuff from within our own tradition and asked what it means to model out loud wrestling with the stuff that you don't like out of your own tradition. And that's an activity, an interfaith activity of vulnerability. Oftentimes the reason why interfaith dialogue devolves into fact-based conversations is because we think that we're solving something in the room, and we think that if we don't posture in that conversation, that we're letting our people down. What if you started from the reverse and said, our tradition has problems. I'm going to study my tradition's problems out loud in front of somebody else. A little bit like undressing in front of someone else, right, from a religious perspective. And what I'm doing then is showing that I have a lot of confidence in my tradition's ability to navigate these issues, and that we are a work in progress or a struggle in progress. And if someone else then, in the reverse, does that too, you've now already built a tremendous amount of the exact trust that you're talking about, and the belief that we can do this with each other and still remain character witnesses to each other's authenticity in the pursuit of something great that we're going to do together. We're starting to do this more at the Institute. So next week, we're doing a live webinar with one of the graduates of this program, and I are going to do a live webinar on the same topic of confronting difficult text. It's going to be live streamed to our conference on democracy in Israel for about 500 people, and it's going to be live on the web. So if you want to join, you're welcome to do so. This may be part of where we have to get to, and if there needs to be a lot more of us trying to do some of this modeling in order to give people the confidence to start doing that kind of vulnerability work, I think we'll get there.
Also, in addition, most of Jewish-Muslim attempts to build a relationship, consistent partnership doesn't go anywhere because the pre-work is not done. Pre-work is not done. This is exactly what we are trying to do with this MLI program. How can you do the pre-work in humanizing the other side, developing a respectful language, and develop some sort of not agreement and endorsement, but understanding? There is a contentious, almost fighting Jewish community somewhere in Connecticut, I'm not going to name. They invited myself and an Israeli peace activist to talk about facts, talk about Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative. Who is right? And most of these facts, if you listen to the people, it looks like my children or Tal Becker's children. If you listen to them, they are saying, everything bad started when he hit me back. Like no one knows who hit each other first. But in that conversation, this Yecheskel Landau from Hartford Seminary, I said, let me present the Israeli narrative and let you present the Palestinian narrative. Let's model to see. I think I have a basic understanding, appreciation, empathy towards the narrative which is not mine. But at least I think I have done the work, pre-work. I have invested time in education. If you show, and it was really incredible. I mean, I'm not, I hope, marketing myself, but all the Jews in the crowd said, you should be the spokesperson of Israeli government. I think you do a better job in explaining what exactly the Jewish dilemmas is going through. But it was incredible, that humility and a little bit of education, what it meant to these guarded Jews who came to defend and attack. You see how that guards immediately drop, and they are now vulnerable and open once they see that level of pre-work is very important.
Yeah, one last thing I'll add to that, and then I'll take a last question, which is sometimes, and I think this goes to campus, sometimes the best and most important work that we should be doing should be not public. I think the posturing sometimes emerges because of the instinct that everything is in public, everything's on a stage, everything is tweetable. I think you would see the ability of Jewish students and Muslim students to sit and talk to each other without adults in the room who have deliberate political outcomes that they're trying to get their students to, and without it being a public story, has the potential to be differently effective. We saw this with a group of college students who came to the Hartman Institute over winter break for a seminar on Israel. And I asked them at the end of the week, what are your takeaways back for campus? It was 100 Jewish students. And we never talked to them about the Muslim work. But one of the participants said, my big takeaway is, I think I know how I'm going to go reach out to my Muslim friends who I can't talk to. And for her it was, I just feel like I have a little bit more language, a little bit more openness, and a little bit more empathy to enter into a difficult conversation that doesn't have to be a big public deal. And that might be some of what has to happen as part of the pre-work, is the willingness to just do quiet things, even if it doesn't make the front page of the paper, or perhaps precisely because it doesn't make the front page of the paper, but because it's actually it's doing the social movement building that we're trying to do.
Also, in terms of, we talked about what to do, what not to do, which unfortunately many Jews and Muslim organizations and communities are doing this. What not to do is doubling down the propaganda and narrowing down the space where a legitimate dissent and disagreement could take place. What's happening on college campuses increasingly, about 5-10 years ago, criticizing the state of Israel and anti-Semitism. That was about a mile. So a mile is good. You can maneuver in that mile. But because of this heightened feelings and emotions, in many campuses, that space shrank into 2 inches. For both Muslims and as well as many Muslims were much more capable. Unfortunately, what is criticized in certain policies of the state, what is anti-Semitism. But regretfully, that's becoming even more complicated these days. Just doubling down the propaganda, dismissing criticism, not allowing people to express their own legitimate dissent on either side. It's not helping to Muslims, it's not helping the Jewish community. It's alienating more Jews and Muslims themselves. Like on my college campuses, I see most of the BDS activists are Jewish students. Many of them. Their faculty advisors are Israeli citizens. Why? Because they feel the increasing propaganda alienates them further. They don't necessarily find a place within the ultra-sensitive, very defensive communities. They don't see a place for them if they're a little bit critical. Same thing exists for the Muslim community as well.
Let me take one last question. Yes, Jackie.
Not my Quran. I think Jews are in a much better position than many other non-Jewish Americans to put themselves in the shoes of many Muslims. And you have, our crazies are so similar. Our crazies who are distorting and perverting our religions are so similar. To tell you how much Muslims are internalizing this, condemn those Muslim crazies, Muslim terrorists, etc. When we were in Jerusalem, we were told there are people who are throwing stones to those buses who run on Saturday, or they are burning buses which has the woman pictures, etc. And you should see the kind of happiness in the Muslim participants, saying, we don't own all the crazies in the world. We don't own all the crazies in the world. The kind of crazies that you have in your own tradition should give you an idea. But unfortunately, of course, thank God, Baruch Hashem, Jewish crazies are still marginal. They are still small, and for the most part, they are not violent. But Muslim crazies are violent. Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, the list goes on. But it's not because Islam has more monopoly over violence. Islamic theology doesn't produce more crazies. It's not uniquely Muslim problem. It's certain through historical, economic, social realities, failed foreign policies, deeply failed societies has brought this. If those Jewish crazies one day go to a different place and find oil, if Baruch Goldstein had the kind of wealth of Saudi Arabia, you would have the same problem. You would have the same ideology in a much larger scale. Thank God you are not facing this problem. But just because of the size, just because of the numbers, shouldn't necessarily make anybody feel that somehow Islam is more vulnerable, or somehow it's unique in producing more violence or more crazies. That's absolutely not the case.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here with us tonight.
Seriously amazing.
Oops.
Phenomenal.
This guy's phenomenal.
I mean, you know what, you guys could take this show on